Mr. Ho, I'll allow Mr. Lam to follow up on two questions. First, very quickly, Chairman, case 9 refers to an importer regarding the importation of 319 batch consignments of live bovine in May 2018, and the audit found that the number of live bovine differed between that stated in the animal health certificate and the actual consignment. So for the admitted quantity, well, if it's lesser than the animal health certificate, let's set that aside. I want to ask about the admitted quantity being greater than that shown on the animal health certificate. And according to case 9, paragraph 2, the audit found that the swine in question might have been imported without animal health certificates. And then in paragraph 3, the slaughterhouse, SHVS, informed the audit that as the total admitted quantity of the swine was less than the maximum quantity of swine permitted under the AFCD permit, it had not sought clarification from the VPHS. Chairman, I have this question for the Secretary. Do you agree that do you agree to the logic adopted by the SHVS? Secretary or Director? Let me invite Dr. Wong to explain first. Yes, Dr. Wong, case 9. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lam, for your questions. Let me first explain that the case involves two sections. One is the VPHS, the other is SHVS. The difference is that for SHVS, the slaughterhouse vet section, we have colleagues attached to the slaughterhouse to oversee matters relating to animal health and food safety. And for VPHS, they're tasked to check the live swine at the Mankamto office and to maintain liaison with the GACC. Now, the SHVS explanation here perhaps has been a misunderstanding about the admitted quantity of the swine. Well, there is an AFCD permit on which the maximum would be stated. The maximum is 29,000 heads, and for the admitted quantity is 12,771 heads. So in other words, the total admitted quantity of the swine did not exceed the maximum quantity permitted in the AFCD permit. And anyway, we have made improvements. Instead of checking on a daily basis, we checked every consignment. Normally speaking, for admission of swine at the slaughterhouse, the colleague would count the number of heads, and then the SHVS would maintain liaison with the permit holder in counting the number of heads. In the past, this would be done on a daily basis. As part of the improvement measures, we would check every consignment. We would check the number of heads in each consignment against the animal health certificate. If the quantity exceeds that on the animal health certificate or on the AFCD permit, we would discuss with the VPHS at the BCP, and they would in turn directly liaise with the GACC on the discrepancy in the number of heads. Well, if I understand correctly, Chairman, it seems that Dr. Wong is of the view that when SHVS informed the audit that as the total emitted quantity was less than the maximum quantity of swine permitted it had not sought clarification. That means you do not agree with this principle. Is that right? Because if you have a stated quantity for each consignment, you should check the quantity of that consignment against the documentation. Now, if the admitted quantity is less than the maximum quantity, then perhaps due to different reasons, we could account for the discrepancy. Perhaps some heads gone missing. But what if the admitted quantity exceeds the maximum quantity? Mr. Lam's understanding is correct. We have implemented improvement measures. In paragraph 3, the explanation is that the CFS would look at the animal health certificates and the information therein. Our vet would also check the other side, and that is an AFCD permit is required for import of live bovine, swine under the rabies ordinance. So that's under the remit of the AFCD, and that a permit is required. The vet section wears two hats. Apart from the CFS, it also observes the maximum quantity under the AFCD permit, and if the maximum quantity is exceeded, the matter will be referred to the AFCD. It is not the case that no clarification was sought because it was not exceeded. Well, for live fish, you could not measure the weight. For swine, you can count the heads, and then after counting, despite the discrepancy, you did not show much concern. So it seemed that your work is rather perfunctory. You don't need to answer that, Mr. Ho. Before the break, Mr. Lam Shek-ting referred to an issue not directly related to the food safety about hairy crabs, and he mentioned dipping the crabs into the lake, and I think it might affect our industry. I want to clarify that this is the way the crabs would be kept, because I understand that the traders would purchase crabs and keep them for 2 to 3 months before reselling them. It's just like grapevine making wine. So in terms of food safety, we are talking about seal numbers and the final inspection. If you're not confident in the brand, you can choose not to buy any product of this brand. As far as our industry is concerned, it is a very important step in establishing our brand. I think that is totally different from food safety issue. It is just about how crabs are reared. And another point, especially for live food animals and live aquatic products, under the existing mechanism, I don't think that the appropriateness has been reflected. For live aquatic products, they may come from mariculture zones, fish rafts, and sometimes we may see aquatic products being taken out of the fish rafts. They will be put in a blue duck bucket, and then they will be weighed, and then they will be put in a container. And there might be some ways to keep them chilled or to keep the fish from touching each other so that their quality can be maintained. And then if you put them back to the tank and weigh it again, by that time the figure would not be very accurate. So you should verify the safety of fish in a certain part of the fish pond for the matter of food safety. These figures may not tally. And about the audit report, I agree with what Mr. Ju said, that there might be a problem with a discrepancy in figures. Is it because of the wrong method used that we are spending money on matters that are not related to food safety? I think for live fish, I think the government should go back and rethink. This is just one method that I mentioned about how fish is transported. It may be an estimation that the total gross weight is 6,000 kilograms, but it may not affect food safety on live food animals. Husbandry farms, well, there may be a similar problem. Anyway, we have been spending 3 or 4 sessions on the same point, and I think that it shows the government's understanding of the industry and its operation is not thorough enough. And that is why the government is even requiring that a form be filled in order to get just the driver's contact number. And it also shows the attitude of the government. The government should be more user-oriented. Otherwise, it will be a waste of resources. Finally, I would like the government to pay particular attention to the grey boxes in Case 9 about the relatively high discrepancy in the quantity. It may have to do with the problem of the government in counting the heads of swine. I think it's pointless to engage in a further argument. So I think I will stop here for the time being. Would you like to start a new part, or would you like to follow up on this, Mr. Xu? Just very briefly, just now different members asked the same question. For the animal health certificate issued by the mainland authority, it would state the quantity, for example, 500 heads. But in actual fact, has there been a case in which you would count the emitted quantity being in exceedance of 500 heads? Dr. Wang, you would go back and check. Did you say that? How about in the recent 3 years? In the past 3 years? Has there been any such case? If so, please let us know. The admitted quantity being greater than that on the animal health certificate.
Who would take up the next part? Part 4. It's about food merchants, food importers, distributors, and the registration and inspection of food traders. When inspections are conducted, they may. Mr. Le, Kenny Le would like to ask questions first. I just want to introduce the subject. I thought Mr. Siu would like to put his questions first. Go ahead. I'm very interested in registration systems. So let me look at page 184 in the Chinese version. Here's some background. I understand that all importers and distributors of food have to be registered unless they have obtained certificates and permits under Schedule 15. There are 10 types of permits, etc. in Table 15. Is this an exhaustive list of exemption permits? When it comes to exemption, there are 2 categories. One, under other laws, the party has already got registered or have got similar arrangement, and this is in the schedule of the food safety legislation. And secondly, they have not been registered under other laws, but we are also authorized by the law to grant one-off exemptions. For example, some importers would like to stage a food exhibition in Hong Kong, and the imports will be done on a one-off basis, and they would provide for a one-off one-time waiver. So Table 15 talks about exempted cases and one-off waiver, etc. Table 15, there are 10 items. First, holder of the permission for a butcher shop. So the butcher shop may be registered as an importer, food importer. So is it the case that the butcher shop can only sell meat? They cannot sell other types of food. Is it the case? Director. So the shop has obtained another permit, and the permit would limit the scope of business to facilitate business, since they have already got a permit under another piece of legislation, and the information of the shop is kept in other department systems, so we don't apply for a registration as a food importer, because the permit that the shop has obtained is for the purpose of food business, and therefore there's no need for registration as a food importer. But no exemption is granted for record keeping obligations, and that is to say no registration is needed. But if the party concerned, the shop concerned, is involved in the importation or distribution of food, no registration is required, but it would be required to tell us the types of food that is been handling, because we have different categories. So no registration is required, but they have to tell us what kinds of food, what kinds of imported food is involved in the business, and the relevant records and documents should be kept. So you mean that the butcher shop can sell vegetables, imported vegetables, under item 1. It's an exempted business. What they need is to inform you or keep the relevant import documentation of the imports. Maybe the meat store operator would like to sell vegetable to facilitate customers who would like to do one-stop shopping. I'm sorry, that they may have to do with retail. If there's a pork distributor who thinks that vegetable business may be profitable and want to do the same, can that be allowed? Well, if a shop is involved in importation and distribution of and food, for these 10 categories, after we have obtained the relevant holder or permit holders, will issue letters to these businesses to confirm whether they are involved in importation and distribution of food. If so, they are required to complete a form to provide information to us. We have database of these food businesses. When there's a food incident, it would facilitate the location of the importer or distributors. It's for the purpose of tracing the operator. So we would get hold of the necessary information. We have already obtained the information from the licensing authorities. All right, understood. In paragraph 4.2a, it said that you issued permits, and you require importers and distributors to be registered. Under the importer or distributor, there may be retailers. Do you require a special a permit for retail business of food? Usually, when what we call a distributor is usually the one in the wholesaler, and then importer has to be registered unless exempted. The wholesaler has to be registered as well, but there's no registration requirement for retailers, and we're talking about registration only. But the ordinance also talks about something other than registration. First, registration. Second, record keeping obligations for imports and exports. For importers, the importation documents have to be kept, and the distribution records are also required to be kept. For distributors, they have to keep records for the supply and the sale records. For distributors, the retailers, they are not required to be registered, but they need to keep documents about the supply of food. And that is that they have to keep information of the supplier, i.e. the wholesaler. And because the retailers sell the products to customers, individual customers, it's just not possible to ask the retailer to keep information on the customers. So what they need to do is to keep records of the wholesaler, the distributor. Understood. 4.3 is about the information required to be kept. Records required to be kept. Are we talking about the different records in paragraph 4.3 when it comes to an importer or a distributor? Well, the records required to be kept will be kept for some period, 2 major periods, 3 months or 40 months, depending on the quality, the preservation period. So 3 months for importers and distributors, for food with a shelf life of 3 months or less, we can ask for the records within the 3-month period. Records will be kept, but in what format? Paper form or electronic data? Have you considered the fact that electronic data can facilitate the smooth operation of your department? Well, we ask records be kept, but the format is not specified, because when the bill was passed, before the bill was passed into law, we heard from the trade that many of these parties were small businesses, and they said that if we specify the formats for the records, then they may have a problem in compliance. Therefore, we do not specify any particular format. But now, computers are more and more powerful, and technology is developing rapidly. In some trade forums, we would advise them to use electronic record keeping system as far as possible. Depending on the severity of the incident, if we want to just trace or get the records or the information, we would like to get the information quickly. And if the information is stored in the computer, the retrieval process will be much quicker. But there's no requirement in the law on the format? Please be succinct in your reply, Director.
focus 啲，咁唔係啊！我哋開今次會都開唔完噶啦。
Well, so that we can complete our proceedings more efficiently. We don't need to go to the law every time. Table 16 sets out a table on the statistics for a 5-year period. We look at the number of registered food importers and food distributors. The numbers have been increasing quite rapidly. I don't really get an answer, but are we saying that because of the booming economy, we are having more people doing food business? That would have an impact on the quality of work of control and inspection. From 2013 to 2017, we see the number of food importers almost doubled. May I get some information on the reason why? Who would take the question, Director? In table 16, Mr. Chairman, as the titles suggest, is a cumulative number. For example, in 2013, we handle a certain number of cases, and then 2014, we add the number. The Director of Audit take a snapshot on of the case on the 2nd of December 2018, and there were 11,888 importers. So that's the number of businesses being carried on that day. At the end of 2018, when if their permits are still valid, this 22,000 importers. It's 11,888 as at 2nd of October 2018. They are active traders. In 2017, in the table, 2,300 something. The total number is 23,000 registered, but only 11,888 were active. Well, we are talking about registered traders or exempt traders, 23,000 on the register, but the registration is for 3 years, but some of them are no longer active. So we are talking about 23,000 businesses for which the registration is still valid or the exemption is still valid. Or maybe they are inactive, although the registration have been renewed. Would you conduct some random checks to find out whether they are still in the business of food importation? 11,000 or 12,000 traders. We are talking about the number of importers whose registration of exemptions was still valid, and even for the 11,000 or so importers or distributors, they might not be in business on that particular date. So it's a voluntary registration system. You will not check proactively whether some businesses are carrying on with this line of business without registration or exemption. Of course, when a company is established, a business registration certificate will be obtained from the ILD. I know that tax information is confidential, but would the ILD inform you that recently we have 30 company registered and 10 of them state that they are involved in food business? Would you check whether this company would have to be registered, or is it really entirely voluntary? registration requirement is a statutory requirement. For the food safety legislation came into effect in August 2011. Before that, a lot of publicity were organized through exhibition and through routine communication with the trade, such as trade forums. We provide information to them, and we also publish leaflets and guidelines to these related businesses, so that they know they have to be registered or they have to make sure that they are exempted. And they have to inform us of the kind of food business they are engaged in, so they would register voluntarily. My question is, can you take this up with the ILD to see whether more can be done? I asked this question because in paragraph 417, it was found that some food importers did not have had not been registered, and these food importers actually did not know that they had to get registered. And then 2 out of 46 of food importers who use air freight to import food did not know that they have to be registered. So 2 were not registered. Why didn't you take follow-up action? Because when they import food, you would have known. And there's another similar incident. We know the government has been doing a good job in some areas, such as the travel agents. You need a license, and you are not need a license to operate a bank. But for food business, unless they are watching this meeting via the live broadcast, many people do not know that they have to register their food business. What can you do to enhance public education? And secondly, have you considered working in collaboration with other departments on such issues? And also, I'm talking about the cases in paragraph 4.17. Are you going to improve your procedures and enforcement?
First, on the promotion education, through the usual ways of CFS, we will reach the sector. And for the Trade Consultation Forum, that will be held every 2 months. Most recently, on October, we remind the trade, if you engage in the import and distribution of food, they must be registered or apply for exemption. Or some of the companies probably would never come to the Trade Consultation Forum, or won't attend your briefings. I believe some companies do that. The thing is, I want to make sure that those who have not aware of this requirement. Beside the consultation forums, the more effective way will be through online promotion or the CFS website. There will be sufficient information on the requirements or how they comply with the registration procedures, the fees. The application form can all be downloaded. We'll continue to step up the education. So that Mr. Leung was asking you, are you missing anyone? Which there's a system for you to check. So Mr. Leung had a suggestion that whether we can liaise with other departments as soon as they finish the business registration, which we can follow up. We can look into it. while at the times of registering the business, there are also limitations on how the department collect the data. Can it really just transfer to other departments? Well, it's a privacy concern. If we can overcome this, I believe this is a good suggestion. Of course, there's privacy protections. While the IRO, their confidentiality, but the registration, business registration, don't require such high level confidentiality, so we can consider that. For the 4.17 cases, why didn't you take enforcement action? You know the importers are not registered. Can you explain? Well, you just look right away that and they are importing without registration. Why didn't you follow up on the 3 cases? Director Lau. For the import or the registration or the record transaction record keepings are applied to all food categories. In this hearing, the focus will be on import-export controls and probably apply to live food, for example, on live swine, beef, and aquatic products. For controlled foods, we must issue them with a import permit. For that, if didn't registered as a food importer, the first thing is that we not issue them with the import permit. So that's applied to regulated food. Kenneth Leung. For the Roman number 1, well, which this had to do with live aquatic products. If the importer doesn't know how to handle live aquatic products and could contaminate it. While aquatic products are high risk, I wonder why did the importer got off scot-free. Well, you explain your mechanism, and yet this is actually what happened. If the importer is not registered, they definitely won't get the import permit. And for 4.17, in which the cases of the 8 imported Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, the aquatic products and vegetables or cooked chicken, these groups, there's no control existing legislation. Kenneth, can you let the Director of Audit explain? Okay, Appendix B. You could understand what would be regulated. Issue with frozen foods. For aquatic products, other than freshwater fish are regulated, the rest are not. That I understood. Regulate or not is a matter for the legislation. However, the inherent risk in food and how they were handled will also affect our health. Even though the high-risk group are regulated, these are also risky. Why do you have an automatic ID system so that you can know which importer are unregistered? Or they be given a registration number or a barcode and so forth for identification. And then you must take action afterwards. Or unless that maybe they are not regulated food and they're less risky, and the importer probably not known quite how to handle this food since they're unregistered or they have no idea or missed out which required to take action. I wouldn't care if they are high risk or low risk. Because the legislation asks you to register, why didn't you pursue them? And so what's your enforcement situation? Director. So earlier I talked about regulated food. I believe there are shortcomings in our handling. For the unregulated food, we will do random testing. And the BCP, now that we're ready undergo testing, we will check the importer will register under the food safety ordinance. I agree that this should be enforcing. So our record file definitely not doing a proper job of not pursuing this. And last September, for our BCP colleagues, when they conducting testing and inspection, they have to verify that where the importer have registered. If they're not registered, we have to check are they being exempt. So we will once again stick to our procedures. Just another question or two. So table 18. Should it list out the number of inspections over the 2014 to 2017 by the risk? And this 4 years you're keeping about over 500 inspections. So how will your record file go about your inspection? Would you first send them a letter, or would that a surprise one? And so what are the steps for each inspection? Do you have guidelines for your staff? Director, I'll defer to Dr. Wang to explain the procedures. Well, the inspections are unannounced. Well, as in the report, we found that the door is locked. Well, due to our manpower, the inspection is about 500. If they see the door is locked, we have to arrange another time. We have to check for the type of food, or rather, they to be records need to be 12 or 3 or 24 months. And we'll check it against the import records. And we have to check for the completeness of the records, whether they comply with the relevant food group requirements. And we'll also be doing some sightings. Our colleagues can't check for all 24 months, so we will just selectively check the invoices. In some cases, if it's a branch, some of the records might be at the headquarters, and then we'll ask the headquarters to supply the invoices. Kenneth, I've also taken up some improvement measures. For the past inspection records, we found there room for improvement. So we now had a inspection checklist, so to convenience our frontline officers to fill it in. And we'll also digitize the checklist. The plus side is that when our colleague checked at the inspection taking place at the time it's taken, under other measures, we can and just took the invoice away, so therefore we'll take photos. In which our officers have checked the invoice, they're in a good condition, and where necessary, we'll follow up. You mentioned about how many colleagues are dedicated to the inspection? or is inspection just part of their job? We have a senior health inspector and 2 other inspectors. Are they dedicated to this task, or do they have to take over other tasks as well? We also have other clerical staff. Besides inspection, they have to handle other line of work, but this is what they mainly do. So for table 17, the table 16 rather, the director claimed there are over just 11,888 active food importer distributors. So you see there's a year-on-year rise, even though a lot of them are probably not active per se. Well, your number of inspections has not increased, and yet the number of imported distributors had risen over time. You have to consider increasing the number of inspections. So it's pretty stable at around over 500, where you should have increased. Well, since the inspection is announced, you claim that their doors are locked and always unattended. So if over 50% like this, would you consider changing the format? Let's say you make a call 1 hour prior and telling them you'll be coming. Can you tell us the hit rate? Let's say if 50 or 60% of the visits were which the vendor is absent and is pointless. And for those unsuccessful ones, I don't have the exact figure. Most of them are open for business when we arrived, or maybe in some cases maybe the operator is on holiday. However, these are not frequent. You could boost the number of and the coverage of the inspections. I think there's a shortage, as a staff shortfall list. In the coming financial year, and for the registration office, we will increase the establishment. Mr. Xu, for the fourth part, we'll talk about the registration and inspection of food traders. So Ken Leung had already gone at length. I think they need to apply a license from the FEHD. Well, they don't need to engage in business right away. Just what they can apply for a license early on, and for the 3 years, they have to carry out any business. It shouldn't be a problem. They can still apply for a license. Yes, they can renew their license. However, whether they operate business or not, it's their business decision. However, if they do any business, they have to keep the record. How much it costs? Let me confirm later. They're about 195 with 180 for renewal. And in Parry 4.9, about 44 unregistered food importers and distributors which were prosecuted. Of the 44 cases, they initially claimed that either unaware of this requirement. So what's the outcome for these 44 cases? Do you fine them or prosecute or just issue a warning letter? We have this data. I'll defer to Dr. Wang to talk about the prosecutions. Well, some of them did not proceed due to lack of evidence. In Parry 4.9, about 44 prosecutions. That's from 2013 to 17. Let's say for 2017, 40 cases, 8 of them have been in 2017 about prosecuted. So since they're usually fined, they're fined from $1,000 to $4,200. In 2016, there are 14. Successful prosecutions, $500 to $30,000 fine. For 2015, 9 cases. For 14, there are 10. They're all fined. Let's say an importer want to import some food into Hong Kong. Well, let's say they're not aware of this issue permit requirement. They need to submit, when they import the food, would they need to submit their registration to you?
Chairman, may I ask Mr. Xu to elucidate his point about the types of foods imported or what? Well, let's take it that for the 44 unregistered food importers caught by you, supposedly they also imported foods into Hong Kong. And supposedly they will be required to obtain a permission or license from the FHD before foods were imported. There should be some sort of food import license or permit. Chairman, that depends on whether the foods so imported are regulated. If the foods are regulated, then under the food import control system, the relevant license should be sought. And if the foods are not regulated under the system, that no further license or permit is required. However, the imported food should be either registered or exempted. Chapter 4 is about food importers or distributors, and there should be some sort of a permit. What's the name of this permit or license? Chairman, it's not a permit or license, it is registration. There is an application form for registration. Once the process is done, there is a register online providing a list of food importers or distributors or parties that enjoy exemption. So it's a status. So the registration is done on the importer's own volition. So even before the consignment arrives, the food importer can register themselves with you. They can do business or otherwise, and they can register first. In actual operation, let's say when an importer imports foods into Hong Kong, you should be aware of the exercise, is that right? Chairman, as of today, for regulated foods or controlled foods, At the moment, we have a lack in our process, and if it's not controlled food, at the BCP, inspection or random inspection may be done, and as mentioned just now, during the inspection, under our mechanism, we will check the documentation as well to see if the food imported is registered. Under the existing mechanism, however, it is not the case that we would be aware of that for every consignment of food. In other words, let's say if an importer imports foods that are not controlled in your system, then no work is required. For controlled foods, at the moment, there is a lagging effect, and that you would not immediately know the details. Let me explain this way. In terms of the registration system and the record keeping requirements, or in fact for the whole food safety ordinance, the objective is to facilitate our work when a food safety incident arises, so that by relying on the registration system, we can rely on the keeping of records by the food supplier to trace the source of foods. In ordinary times, of course, the legal requirements of record keeping should be observed. When there is an incident, however, we should be able to exercise the authority given under the ordinance to request that records be provided by the food importers or distributors, so that we can trace the origin of the food imported, and that we could issue a recall order on the basis of the information provided. Mr. Shiu, I fully agree that we should be able to trace the source of foods. But the point is, these companies might have registered themselves with you even before the consignment has arrived. And then the government should know when a consignment arrives. My point is, why don't you carry out registration at the point of the consignment being imported into Hong Kong? Because the company may be paying $195 for registration without doing business. It may be a waste of time and registration fee. Is there any way to help these companies when the consignment actually arrives, that the registration can be done there and then you can trace the importer and distributors as well? In fact, for part 2, Mr. Leung asked about the 20 plus importers or distributors. In fact, only half of them are active. Not all of these companies are actively in business. So there must be a way for us to track them, track the active ones. Otherwise, we don't need to waste resources to register companies that are not really active. That's my point. That's the question I want to ask for the time being. All right, who would take the question? Chairman, as I explained just now, currently, in our system, for import of non-controlled foods, every day by air, by sea, by land, we have import of foods in large quantities. We may not grasp the full information, and we have random inspection, and we may not inspect every consignment. As mentioned in the audit report, under some circumstances, the import permit might not have been used, and we did explain that it's not that they were not used, they were not informed, we were not informed yet. Well, as I mentioned just now, we are upgrading our information technology system, and we would very much hope to set up a portal for food traders. so that all relevant information about the movement of consignments and customs declaration, they can be provided on the web portal. And we are doing preparation meanwhile. And of course, we rely very much on communication with the trade, and we welcome their views. Well, Chairman, can I clarify one point? For food imported into Hong Kong, some of the foods are controlled, some are not. For controlled foods, they would need to apply for licenses, permits, etc. So you know very well about these controlled foods. Otherwise, you still would conduct a random inspection for non-controlled foods, or is it that the non-controlled foods would totally fall outside the registration system and no inspection be conducted? The purpose of the registration system is not to ascertain the import of foods, whether an import permit is required. The primary function of the registration system is for us to understand that some food traders are engaged in certain businesses. And one important piece of information is the types of foods the trader is engaged in, so that when a food incident happens, we can trace the traders. Now, you talked about the import of food, whether at that point in time we have all the information. Well, we have issued the relevant license or permit, and as discussed before, after obtaining the import license, it may not be the case that food may be imported. Perhaps the deal didn't come through, and the consignment is not imported. And the audit already suggested that there should be a cancellation system if the food is not imported. So as explained just now, under the present system, we do not have full information about the import of food at the time of import, but in the future, if we could drive a consensus among the trade, we can then set up a system so that in terms of inspection and safeguarding food safety, we can enhance our function. Can I take it that way? Let me give you two examples. Fish is regarded as controlled foods. Freshwater live fish, right? It is regulated, it is controlled. And cookies not controlled food, right? Let's say if I'm an importer of cookies, and another importer is for importing live freshwater fish, under the registration system, would both be required to be registered? All food traders are required to be registered regardless of the types of foods engaged in its business, whether it's controlled or not. So be it cookies or freshwater fish import, according to your ordinance, these companies would be subject to random inspection on their office premises, say for a 3-month period or for a 24-month period. Now my question is this. You're going to trace all the source of all food items. So why is it that at the time of import you do not mandate registration? Why do you require registration beforehand? I think Mr. Shu's question is this: whether we should mandate registration at the time of import. Right, do it in one go. Why do you require them to register themselves beforehand as two separate exercises? Why don't you do it in one go? Sorry, speaker's not coming through. Please turn on the mic. I think it's a question of how we balance business and the work of CFS in tracing the source of foods. I think for the food safety ordinance, there are two main objectives. We need to find out what what food traders are engaged in their business and the source of foods. Now, Mr. Shill's suggestion is feasible, but it is not convenient for traders. It is just like business registration generally in Hong Kong. Many people would register the company before the company actually engages in business. After registration, however, the company can start business anytime, so it's about striking a balance. What the Center of Food Safety does at the moment is to strike a balance while making sure that the center will be able to perform its function. Now, for the two kinds of companies, when the consignment is imported into Hong Kong, definitely they need to be registered because they are food items. And if that is done, data will be available at the time of import, and there is no need, therefore, to go through the registration procedures beforehand. It's very clear because these companies are food traders. They are engaged in the import of food items. Eugene, it's a matter of whether we have confidence. If you are sure that you will be engaging in this business, and if the government allows prior registration, so that we know that this is a legitimate food trader. Now, during the import of food, well, if registration is only carried out then, it will create uncertainty for the sector. I think the point is simple. The importer bears liability. If registration is needed, then it should be done. And it's really up to the importer to decide whether to carry out business even before it is registered. Now, if it doesn't carry out registration, then the liability falls on the importer. Well, let's see if you have other questions about this point, because they seem to be beating about the bush. Perhaps we can discuss with them later today. Mr. Shiu, I understand that. I just want to make this point, and that is whether they can simplify the procedure. If you know that food will be imported at a certain time about company A, you can just go after company A. I think this is Mr. Shiu's suggestion on how you can improve work. And you can tell us the registration system. Well, I don't see why you need prior registration. I don't quite understand your demand, because when the food consignment has arrived, of course I know that registration will be needed, because if you need prior registration, well, in the past it might not be possible without the help of computers, but now you can automate the process and save costs. Mr. Shiu has made a very good suggestion, so go back and think about it. Yes? 3 questions, 3 simple ones. I also agree with Mr. Leung and Mr. Shiu. Ultimately, whether we have prior registration or not, each option comes with pros and cons. Well, you may need to follow some registration requirements, and that if you are to import food, you need to follow other requirements. And Mr. Shiu, from the businessman's perspective, suggests that we can simplify the procedure. And he also has a point. Well, Ms. Lau just now mentioned that they do not have full information about the import of each assignment of foods, and I don't think giving any reassurance to the public. So I need you to clarify this. When you say you do not have full information, are we talking about key information? Is the information crucial to food safety, or what is its significance? Tell us what information you're referring to. If this is key information you're talking about, then I'm sorry to say that you have not been doing a proper job. And that's really two different concepts. Director. My understanding of Mr. Shiu's question is whether we know which food type would be imported into Hong Kong when. Well, at present, indeed, we do not know fully exactly when each type of food will be imported into Hong Kong. Well, in terms of safeguarding food safety, we have the food import control system, and at the retail distribution wholesale level, we also have food surveillance programs. We would conduct testing on foods. We take on average 65,000 food samples for testing every year. And this is part of our work. What we don't know for sure is exactly when the food items will be imported. So even if that is the case, if you can safeguard the safety of food, as pointed out in the previous chapter as well, that's basically the line you uphold. Now, just now I talked about some 20,000 companies being registered. Some are active in business, some are not. And then you take a risk-based approach in conducting random inspections, some 60%, 50%, etc. I think I want to ask whether you adopt a lottery model, that if you have if you have import of food, it would come with a number, and then it would fall into the high risk pool, and then you will take a 50% random inspection approach. Is that how you do your inspection, or how do you select the inspection targets? Because on the one hand, we need to find out why some targets are not chosen, and we need to find out whether the company has been registered and whether there is any food imported.
So this is a question about whether you can really achieve the purpose of tracing the source, the origins, the sources. When we conduct random checks, we will set the risk levels, and we will consider certain factors. I'll ask Dr. Wong to elaborate. Thank you for your question. Table 18 tells you that there are 3 levels of risk: high, medium, low. I'm not asking a question on this, but I'll let them answer. Let her answer. You asked about the random inspection. Higher, medium, and lower risk are set because of limited resources. So the risk of business is ranked, and then we take 10%, 40%, or 50% of the records for inspection. It's done by computer, a random selection. In 2017, we conducted 41% on the higher risk businesses. The target was 50%. Why? It's because the list selected may vary from month to month because of rounding up or down. And so the end result might be a little bit different from the original target. And we'll change the formula to be used by the computer in randomly select the businesses. Let's say we have 500. The quota for selection for random check is 500. Higher risk business means 250 places. And now we would check the actual number, 250 instead of 50%. So we have a better chance of achieving that in the annual target. We also look at the districts. We hope that all the 80 districts we will not be concentrating on certain districts. We hope that for the 500 high-risk businesses, we covered all the districts evenly. So you have 500, 50% means 250 businesses we've checked, and then you check the those with import business, or would you select among all the businesses whether they have import business or not? So the question is whether you select the businesses with the business or with registration. Well, we refer to the registration list. We have a list of registered businesses, and the selection is done based on that list. You have 20,000 registered businesses. Only 10,000 are actually doing the business. And you may check 50%, but half of them are not in operation. Then at the end of the day, you may just inspect 50% of the 50% on the list. Can you clarify the approach? Well, it has to do with how we get the figures in table 16. It tells you the cumulative number of registered importers and distributors. The registration period is 3 years. So we have on our hand a valid list, a valid register. Let's say they register in 2013, and after 3 years it was not renewed, is no longer active. Is how the data are represented in the table. What's the actual figure? 11,994 in 2018. That's an active list? Yes. Have you looked at whether in the past 24 months they were active, they were in operation? Because the law says you have to keep records for 24 months. And if they were not active in the past 24 months, then you are wasting your resources in doing the inspection. Well, it's difficult to understand your logic. And you're talking about the maximum period, 24 months, and for different live show. Dr. Wong, thank you for your questions. Let me put it like this. Let me express this in another way to see if you can better understand it. The business would get registered if there's a likelihood that it would import food. There's a fee for registration, and forms have to be filled, so they have to pay a price. So it's basically an importer. But when would it actually imports food? That's a business conduct. We've got a database of these registered importers, and then we would select those from different risk categories. But the conduct was never put into practice. So in the past 3 years, some of these might have been registered, but it doesn't mean that they had actually done it in the past 3 years. If you choose from the pool, I don't know how the risk is categorized, because they're just claims. And if they did not, if the selected selected ones did not actually import anything. So would you regard that as a case of full compliance? The question is, why do I have to spend money to ask you to do inspections? I want you to catch those who did not make the necessary declarations. Dr. Wong, please clarify. First, how do you differentiate or tell apart the risk level of these businesses and whether they will actually engage in the line of business? If there's no business conducted, how can you specify the risk level? We're talking about registered importers, and if they have actually imported food, and you can check if the food products are of a higher risk nature or no. So they must have actually done the business before we can tell that the risk level should be this or that. As the director said, registration doesn't mean actual business has been conducted. And they have to spend money on registration. But you should check those businesses which have actually conducted business of food importations, and before you can really rank the risk as high or low. I think as we put more questions, we found some problems with the answers. Let me talk about the risk level. No. How do you select the businesses to be inspected? You do it by computer, because you have a list of registered importers. How many of these registered importers are actually doing business, are active? And then only when they're active can you say that the risk of business is higher, or lower, or medium. Sorry, I have to say something about the risk of business, higher, medium, lower risk. When they got registered, they would tell us the line of business, what types of food they intended to import, and also the mode of operation of the business. Was it a big shop? They have to tell us the size of the operation, and then we can more or less assess the risk level. For higher risk business, we're talking about smaller businesses, smaller shops, and also we look at the type of food products to be imported, or the businesses which had a record of problems. So when they come to register, they would provide the information. But I cannot rule out the possibility that after registration, the business did not actually operate or was not active. But they may have already got plans to import food. So when we select the inspection sample, we resort to the most straightforward approach. We select from the list. But if we go to a business which is not active, then it should not count towards the total target of 500. But we have to be sure, we have to check the documents to make sure that it was not active. Some importers or distributors may be active or may not be active. Of course, it's a big change store with all the information stored in the computer. Will consider that the scale operations might not require too frequent inspections. I hope you will not talk about what the case should be. You should tell us the data. If you have selected a business for inspection and it was not active, would you select another because you need to cover 50%? You describe the selection mechanism as the most as the simplest one you can have. I hope you have to bear in mind the objective of doing the inspections and not just the money that you would have to spend in the selection process. 50%, 40%, 10%. Higher risk 50%, medium risk 40%, and lower risk 10%. How did you set the percentages for the three levels of risk? Do you, if you select a big sample, and if the risk is low, should you maintain the same spread of the total number? For example, if medium risk is not really high, you don't need to allocate 40%, because food risk is a question of culture. It's a question of culture. If no one is littering, you don't need to deploy people to catch those littering. It's a question of food safety culture, and you have to base a decision on the risk, actual risk. Director, for higher risk business, the ratio is 50%, medium risk 40%, lower risk 10%. These are working indicators. They can be changed in the light of actual operational experience. And in the past, our inspection records were not digitalized, and now we would apply for funding to enable us to store the inspection data electronically in a computer, and that would inform us on how often we should inspect a food business. This is being done. In the future, we would base our decision on the data collected, and then we can decide whether the percentages should be adjusted. You should conduct a review once every 3 or 4 years. I think your suggestions are very good, like those proposed by Mr. Siu. We want to have value for money reviews. I think that's helpful to the department. Can we now complete the entire chapter? Part 5 is simpler, and it's okay if we have more questions after we wrap up the meeting today. We can put our questions in writing to them. Part 5 is about the way forward. There aren't many questions on this. Let me turn to the page indicated by Mr. Siu. Publicity. Can I ask some more questions about part 4 while Mr. Ho is searching for the right part in part 5? 4.17. Actually, we have asked some questions. Roman 1, Roman 2. Some businesses were found to be engaged in import and export without registration. 4.17. Why was that? 4.17 says or states the case of 8 importers. We are following up the matter. On some cases, we are now seeking advice from the Department of Justice. The time in question was from January to April 2018 for some of the cases. And now at the boundary crossing facilities, we check whether the consignments imported by importers are from registered importers. And there are also another 4 cases that we have followed up. 4 were already registered at the time of importation, and 1 was an exemption case. We are following up on the remaining cases, and in respect of some of those cases, we are seeking advice from the DOJ. Well, actually, on the time of the arrival of the consignment, you would know that the importer is registered or not, and you can process the registration right away. And for 420, the audit check 49 cases, and then I said that you inspected 49 cases. In some cases you find the doors locked, and there are no food business carried out. And in 22 of them, the importer's distributor had replied that they have no food business. So there was no reason why they would be registered. Maybe they don't mind paying $190, but that would affect our statistics. At the time of food importation, you can at least you will know right away whether the importer is a registered one or not. Part 5. Part 5 is related to some past issues, such as 5.14. 77 out of the 117 involve some omissions in importation procedure, or the wrong input of importation data.
And it was written later that your food control officers, your supervisory visits are related to the earlier parts, so we don't need to go too far into that. Even though the director claimed there are 17 interfaces would not be connected, but they're all within the as food safety. Ask a user to go through different departments, for example, the C&E, the TID, the CFS, or even to Wong Tai Sin or Kowloon Bay. So you need just to go to the office to pick up a form. It would make things too complicated. Well, there are so many things need to do in one single department, together with all the departments. Well, the declaration with the foreign agencies. So it's probably not standardized, and we high chance of mistakes. And in this PAC report, the government claimed they will break up the step, but didn't have any connection. Would you consider splitting them up, or like the director Lau claimed that they will have created a position to look into the overall import control regime? So are you going to be take with a user-friendly perspective to reduce any clerical errors or inadequate understanding of the legislation, so that they could get a one-stop service while the rest can be done by telephone or online, so as to reduce the chance of errors, because every day we deal with so huge amount of import quantities. The proposed approach can reduce the likelihood of errors. Director. So after creating this new position, the relevant section is working on it. So we have two major directions to streamline our procedures and review our IT system. One of them will be fixing the FICS or upon the food consignment arrival or the management of food incidents. So we just want to rationalize the procedures. So it's more to do with the system upgrade. So we look at the import level from the first step. So we'll take the user perspective. That's why hopefully by the end of this year, we can create a portal for food importers so that you can store the key data fields when handling the import documentation. We hope to connect the different interfaces, system interfaces, and we'll also revamp the whole data structure to create a win-win situation. On one hand, will make things easier for the importers to store the information. As a regulator, through automation and leverage on technology, we can streamline our procedures. And we just want to avoid repeat inputs. For example, for the electronic certificate, where the relevant data fields can be automatically filled in, especially on the food categories, the quantities, the place of origin for fresh food or live swine and cattle, and the farm code and so on can be automatically filled in. So they involve the whole logistic flow. So maybe you can provide us with a simple answer or a simple paper and also a timetable. So from 2017 till now, I'm glad to see that you carry out this review. Can you provide us a simple document as well as a time frame? Another piece of advice. While I emphasize about communication among departments, you've also been liaising with CNE also and the AFCD. In part for some of the importers, at the last second, they found some of the ingredient used is considered a protected animal, and they need to supplement the documentation right after. When I declare the food, do you have the key piece of information instead of withholding the whole consignment and wait for 1 or 2 months before they can be released? And for 5.25, for the one-stop submission of document, is not more to do with just the trade submitted documents. It's just how also the government need to provide feedback, or they want to provide a check for the bills. Want you to see that which type of food would require extra documentation. In order to remove trade barriers, you have to take into account of this instead of just the Center for Food Safety, AFCD, CNE, TID. So it's one-stop shop, and also with business facilitation. when we create this new section, on one hand, we are revamping our food control system. Our goal is that when the government launched the trade single window, that could be connected to our system would facilitate a data flow. Kenneth Leung. So talking about on trade single window, I'm the member of the Trade and Industry Consultative Committee. I think we actually started that section already, or overall speaking. On TSW, since I have advised on this, in which the TID have launched this single window for the lodging of all the trade documents and declarations, which include food. So for 5.25 to 5.28 to 9 are the relevant sections. Was a good thing that the different departments are going to that direction. And for 5.25, if the TSW to be launched, all the registration and the submission can be done electronically, and while you're digitizing the process, each of you are doing different things. By 2023, 4 to 5 years' time, at the launch of the TSW, I'm concerned that whether you can really successfully interface with other systems. I wonder what's the progress. And now that each department bureau only doing their own thing, and by then the TID tracing window will connect to different departments for the sharing of the information. Can you explain that how this new system being constructed can dovetail with TSW? And for 5.27, can you let him answer the first part of the question so that they can make sure they can answer each part of the question? In CFS, responsible to our own system development. And for the dovetailing with the TSW, the relevant policy bureau have launched a working group which we are part of. Besides FEHD, and all other departments that are involved with import control are also a member of this working group to ensure that what we're doing will have a successful interfacing with the TSW. How frequent do you hold the meetings? So maybe the director can just supply the information after meeting, so we can move on to the second part of the question. A piece of advice or question. Let's say you successfully connect to TSW by 2023. Besides the applications or document submission that could be done quicker, I think you need to consider from the enforcement angle, how do you do quicker and save manpower? If a lot of information can be extracted, especially on import information, in your import control, things can be quicker and more efficient. I don't need you to answer right away. So the system interfacing and an architecture as an end user, so you should. I hope you can think more beyond the application. I hope that enforcement architecture built in some a module so that your colleagues can exploit this technology. So there's a piece of advice. Any other? Mr. Xu? My question 5.11 or table 21. Then all the way to 5.14, the audit found out of 111 food consignments, 66% of the consignments, there were errors or omissions for data input into FICS, as shown on table 21, which include incorrect name of the importer, incorrect health certificate number, and the releasing the consignment with the wrong seal number, with wrong incorrect weight of foods and number of cartons, and the omission of the health certificate number, input license number, so on and so forth. So 66% for every 3 cases, 3 of the consignments would incorrectly input. Can the director explain? Table 21. Who will take the question? I'll defer to Dr. Ho. Table 21, we do see there are shortcomings. There are errors and omissions. We had addressed this and instruct the frontline colleagues. Could you explain which part are shortcoming and where it got wrong? So we want to be forward-looking. When you claim that you have admit mistakes, not acceptable because you need to draft the report. And Mr. Xu have asked you very clearly. I've asked you to respond individually. So can you explain the causes of the mistakes? Is it institutional level or is it a human error? So our colleagues are not doing a good job while inputting this data. For example, they inputted incorrectly and some of the information they should have put in the system were omitted. So they will remind our colleagues, whenever they do data input, they have to ensure that it is correct. Also strengthen our supervision, and now we conduct random checking on the data input. After the improvement, we see the situation is looking good. Please continue. I'm asking to explain the various types of mistakes. Nothing further? Mr. Xu. The public will think that unsatisfactory of the 117 cases, 2/3 of them were flawed at 66%. So which record file are involved? So who is there to check them? I think you should all sit down. Is it insomnia or excessive workload, or is there some poor labor relations? Or it shouldn't be happening in the first place. I think for the medium and senior civil servant need to investigate the cause of the system flaws to reduce wastage. These statistics are rather appalling. To sum up, for trade single window and so on, how do we exploit technology is important. So your department claimed that you could be considering from 2017, chose 2 years on. Is it reasonable? It was kind of complicated system. Well, it's 2019. Well, technology is supposed to speed things up. And Secretary for Innovation Technology, rather than doing PR, they need to look at the government departments or the internally and come with the recommendations. Thank you, Chairman. Well, it's a good suggestion because sometimes if the other departments can't get other departments to act, then we'll put it in the report. Any other questions? I don't have the heart to go any further. Can the 2 questioner wrapped up? So we've been discussing on the procedures and the department's response, I'm sure that members are not completely satisfied. I hope the need to give a full account to the public when we release the report. Well, the two doctors have tried their best to answer the questions, but we got into quite a lot of detail, so we understood they're not able to come up with a satisfactory answer. So when you come to the PAC hearings in the future, I hope that you can have a better grasp of the situation. And Mr. Ho and Mr. Shaw claim that after a few meetings, you still claim you have to go back for answers, especially of Dr. Wong. I know that you need to take care of a lot of things. You're probably not going to be on top of everything. I hope that instead when we draft the report, it will be based on what your satisfactory answer or not, that we need to have to be put on official record. If another questions, we will write to you, and then we also supply the document as requested and promised it. As for them not able to answer question, not only did FHB or when other officials should take note of the choice of the officials. If we can't answer the question, not able to help write report, otherwise it will actually take more time. For example, on the livestock animals, they will actually get a frontline staff to answer our questions and also be helping our work as well. Mr. Xu, I agree with Mr. Ho. We do need to have the most senior higher officials. We actually need to get someone in the know. Even if they don't have first-hand knowledge, they know the problems as detected at the audit. You have to check out and check at the scene yourself. At least you need to think about what happened. If you're not prepared for the hearing, that would be a waste of time for us to have a hearing. I hope you understand that we need to have this in the report. Just it will depends on the amount of information you provide. And when the Director of Audit had come with this excellent report and had to do with the food safety and control regime, would have a huge impact to the public if it not been properly safeguard the public health and safety, or well, not a good thing for the public to ingest something wrong.
I hope that after answering our questions, you make improvements in response to either the audit report or to the PAC's work. The most important thing is to look forward. Thank you. Thank you, Director of Audit.